My name is Reverend Ronald Johnson, and I've been a member of Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church since 1956. That places me almost here 70 years, minus one, give or take a minute. But anyway, that's who I am. Some of my fondest memories growing up here at Mount Olive would be a couple of things. Baptist Youth Fellowship. At one year I was the president of the Baptist Youth Fellowship, and that was exciting because I had an excellent coach, Mrs. Mary Sharp. She taught me all that I needed to know about running a business meeting, and I used that skill as a dean when I became a senior dean at Joliet West. I learned parliamentary procedure from Baptist Youth Fellowship, and I was able to use that skill to run a business meeting, and I valued that. Another fond memory was my Sunday school class. The class that I was introduced to Jesus Christ, it was taught by Deacon John Holmes, the father of Deacon Orland Holmes later on, but nonetheless, the man was a phenomenal musician. And you know, when you're growing up, you kind of take things for granted. I did not realize until I became a musician how much time and effort this man put into learning to play that violin. It seemed like he could play anything. Nonetheless, he was my Sunday school teacher, and he was so exciting. Those are the two things that I remember growing up at Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. You know, growing up in the church was interesting. My dad sang in the choir. And you know how little guys are sitting, we're squirreling out, and my dad would hold up one finger, and he's coming out of the choir stand, and we know we're about to catch it. But anyway, the culture there was very, how can I say? You had to be quiet. You couldn't squirrel out as a child. You just had to sit there and behave yourself. And that was difficult for a little squirrely boy, because my brother would look at me and I'd look at him, and we could try to keep from laughing, but we did. We were able to control ourselves because my mom would have pow if we hadn't behaved. Or my dad would have come out of the choir stand. He only had to do that one time. It was so embarrassing. A typical Sunday morning at Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church when it was on Chicago Street was my parents, well, we had to go to church. I can remember later on when I was a teenager, I was stretched one morning and I said, Mom, I've learned all there is to learn in Sunday school, and I don't think I need to go anymore. Because my peers, they were not going anymore. And my mother said, boy, as long as you live in this house, you will be going to Sunday school. And here I am, still in Sunday school. But that's what it was like. When you asked me about the culture, it was very orthodox. I'll use that term, orthodox. It was very, I remember certain key things. During the offertory, they used to recite a particular passage, and I can't give you the actual address right now, so I'm not going to try, but it was something that just stood out in my mind. Lay not up on yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, but rather lay up treasures in heaven, where moth and rust does not corrupt, nor do thieves break through and steal. That's something that they repeated every time they lifted the offering, and that stood out in my mind. The passage that stands out in my mind growing up was Reverend A.M. Vonado. He was a brilliant man, and he was like a father to me, a second father. But that was all I knew for quite a while was Reverend A.M. Vonado. He was the outstanding one. He was a twin himself. Reverend Vonado was a twin. I don't know if his brother also preached, but I do know that he had a twin brother. And they were not identical twins like Don and I are. They were fraternal twins. They looked different, but they were born at the same time. But all I remember is that he was like a father. And I love that man. I did. But he was pretty much, I consider him the outstanding pastor in my life. Some of the key things that come to my mind when we were on Chicago Street was every Sunday morning the deacons would open up the service and they would sing a Dr. Watts hymn, and it was interesting, but that was the culture. Then they would follow it, of course, with a prayer, and that's what I remember. And of course, the other thing that I remember about Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church on Chicago Street was when the choir came in. Now, the choirs don't march in like they used to. That was one of the cultural things that I enjoyed watching the choir. Oh, they would be stepping and swaying left and right. And it was like a processional. And I enjoyed that. That's the one thing that stood out in my mind was the choir. Some of the things that I can remember growing up in Mount Olive as a child was the Sunshine Band. Now, I didn't know what that was, but they offered an opportunity for children to join the band. And I used to love watching the bands march down Chicago Street. And so that excited me as the Sunshine Band. Came to find out it was not what I thought it was. It was a gathering of small children to teach them more about Jesus Christ. And they called it the Sunshine Band. Trying to think of some other things that stood out. Oh, I sang in the choir. And another thing I learned to do, my mom used to watch Lawrence Welk on television, and I had to watch it too because she was in control of the television. And the Lawrence Welk band had a clarinet player on it. Pete Fountain was his name, I believe. And my mom says, I want you to play that instrument. I said, okay. And so I learned to play the clarinet. And later on at Mount Olive, a band was formed. Now this was under the direction of the son of Deacon John Holmes. This man was Deacon Orland Holmes. And we had an orchestra, and I played lead clarinet in that orchestra. My brother played French horn. Matter of fact, Don became a professional musician. He was phenomenal on French horn, and how he ended up playing the French horn was we used to listen to a TV show called The Men of Annapolis. It was about a Navy show, and at the beginning, there was this instrument that just sounded so outstanding. It was like you could hear it through all the other instruments. And Don said, I want to play that instrument. What is that instrument? Well, we came to find out it was called the French horn. Donald became one of the finest French horn players in this area. I mean, he was very good. And I think we both we both turned out okay on our instruments. Today I've been here at Mount Olive almost 70 years. And what it has meant to me now that I look at the culture of the church that we have currently, one thing that used to bother me as a child growing up is that everybody that I looked around in church looked like me. But I went to school with kids that didn't look like me. And I said, now, heaven is supposed to be housing everybody. And it bothered me that it wasn't a multi-ethnic cultural gathering on Sunday morning. I do now understand what happened. Systemic racism is what created that situation. However, I went out looking for a church that would be representative of what heaven would be like. And so Mount Olive today represents that. We have Hispanic members, we have white members, and of course we have the African American member. But we are becoming a multi-ethnic, multicultural church. And that's what I believe heaven will look like. One of the most exciting things that I remember growing up here at Mount Olive was going to the National Baptist Convention, where I saw teenagers from all over the United States. And I was caught up in that. It was just awesome. I made a lot of new friends. And that was the most exciting thing, was going to the conventions. My name is Ronald Johnson. I'm one of the associate ministers here at Mount Olive. And I've been here forever.